joining me.
Thank you for having me.
It's excellent. So one of the things that really strikes me for the MENA market at the moment is that around 48% of the market doesn't have access to the bank, to online banks or actual physical banks. How do you see that in comparative to the rest of the world with your experiences in Europe and Asia?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously a peculiar region in that sense because I grew up in Europe, and so banking is something you take for granted. So many people, majority, I don't know what the percent is, probably over 90% have access to some sort of bank account or sort of traditional finance venue. So I think there's obviously, but there has been a period in Europe as well where bank accounts, especially if you're coming, let's say, coming into the UK and you want to open a bank account, that was a struggle. You had to have certain, like proof of address and a couple of other things. So I think some of it is probably the challenges that this region is experiencing, something that Europe went through. I think it's a bit kind of like the percent you highlighted. I think is a bit larger than at least what I'm used to, sort of like over my lifetime. So I think so it's kind of like I see a bigger divide, and that's a bigger gap. People not having bank accounts.
Of course, 100%. I can remember you mentioned the UK. I remember being a student going back, and they asked me for KYCs with a proof of address, and my parents lived in Saudi, so I couldn't even open a bank account with wanting to give them money. Is this where you see the angle of not just the digital trading with ourselves and the growth? Is this where you see the digitalization in banking coming and changing the market as well?
I think it's two angles. I think crypto has obviously been quite popular in the region and have recently become quite popular as well, specifically here in the UAE. So I think there will be a greater penetration, from that side of things. And obviously, we know crypto has kind of become an alternative venue, to traditional banks. I think that's one angle. I think the second angle is we're seeing sort of some of the global sort of digital banks like Revolut, moving and opening offices here. So got recently, if I'm not mistaken, EMI license.
Yeah.
There's a signal as well from them to get a banking license. So I think these guys have been the catalyst for that kind of account, mass account opening for a lot of the people that didn't have previously bank accounts with high street banks. So I think this is the second sort of angle that I see, to expand these services here in the Middle East.
Now, one of the things you mentioned was Revolut expanding. Obviously, in Europe, there are other choices, guys. There's Wise and all of these as well.
Yeah.
But in MENA, I think you obviously see Revolut coming in. You're seeing family offices, funds. You saw Bolsaro put in, I believe, 200 million into the last round of seed funding.
Right.
Do you see that as maybe Revolut opening as a HQ here, or just offering the services? How would you envisage that?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, obviously Europe has been very successful for them, but there has been a long period of time when they weren't making money, so it was just sort of generating revenue but no profit. I don't know. I think it depends on what I guess the EBITDA from the region shows there. I do think that the demand will be very, very high considering the percentages of people not having a bank account. I do think as well Revolut has crypto offering, and I think that will expand further.
Yeah.
So I think sort of because the crypto is so much prevalent here, so a lot of the guys that don't have bank accounts are transacting in some way or form, via crypto. Revolut bridging that gap, I think, might produce significant, demand for them. So about moving HQ, I don't know. They just got a license in the UK and opened, a new swanky office there, Canary Wharf. So, so I don't know about that, but I do think that, it's going to have a very high demand over here.
Yeah, I think for me, digitalized banking, you see it in various forms, but I think Revolut, Wise, these kind of companies in the future, they're starting to take very large market shares.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, the one thing that I see, especially in the MENA region, whether it's from Saudi with the Crown Prince, whether Sheikh Mohammed here in Dubai, a big influence of the population here is empowerment of women and getting them into the workplace and allowing. And one thing that really astounded me, that over 60% of most females don't even have their own bank account.
Yeah.
So I can see that digitalization bringing that equality more in line.
Yeah.
And also one of the things that really interests me is that the over 60% of the population in Dubai is under the age of, in the MENA region is under the age of 30.
Yeah.
And I think we're all moving away from that traditional banking. Myself, I'm a young 40-year-old, but I think I pretty much get my salary paid into a bank, I move it to Revolut, I travel, it's much easier on the exchange rates. So I think you're starting to see that move away from that traditional holding bank. And I think I've been a Lloyd's customer, an offshore and onshore customer for 25 years, and now I don't barely use them because the inflexibility, the lack of the customer support, and I think, do you find that with these companies like Revolut and Wise, do you think they're learning from the trading space and these customer support angles in how to penetrate the markets?
I think so. I think it's a great way for for people that again don't have a bank account. I think it's a good way for them to kind of to start with that. But also if we look at Revolut today, cryptocurrencies, they have access to stock trading. now they've done a deal with CMC, you know, where like, you know, that sort of CFD side of things will start
100%.
kind of coming in as well. But I do think like this market will be very good because for them, because you know, if you look at apps like Careem, you know, the taxi, you know, the share riding app, like, I mean, the user experience is very similar to what we're used to, you know, like in Europe, for example, Uber and stuff like that. So I do think that there will be like just organic demand for that. And yeah, like, I mean, obviously, you mentioned the gender divide, you know, between kind of like men and women. I think obviously like the regional specifics, they have to be, well, the region, like companies have to tread carefully along the cultural lines here around that. But I do think that, yeah, like, you know, that kind of like the process, because Revolut, you know, everything is digitized, AI powered, you know, KYC and things like that. So I think it's going to be a lot easier for many people, not having to, you know, I don't know what the procedure is exactly, you know, here in UAE, but like I do know that it takes time, like you need to have a lot of documents. So yeah, I do think the demand is going to be high for this.
I mean, one thing we mentioned there was like obviously the EMI license with the regulatory, you know, the market disparities. These are my kind of areas, but you know, the regulation and that kind of side, I would say, is more yours. Are you seeing the local regulators in the MENA region as a whole becoming more adoptive towards these EMI licenses opposed to the traditional licenses as well?
I think so. I think like so far what we have seen, obviously a pretty good uptake in terms of crypto, you know, so and relatively friendly regulation in general. So I do think that these sort of innovative, as long as the companies can demonstrate proper due diligence, you know, because where it goes wrong usually is that some new service or new new product launches and then people start complaining that you know, like they're not getting what they're paying for. 100%. I think as long as there is that sort of due diligence done on the side of these companies, I think we're you know, like I don't see issues in you know, with these types of products and services in this region.
And in terms of the onboarding, obviously the difference between, let's say, Europe and an offshore, do you see the EMI situation becoming more of a European model for the onboarding of the clients, or do you see it becoming a lot more liberalized, like let's say some of the offshore banking options that are happening from Bahamas and these kind of areas? Because traditionally, obviously, you need, as we said, KYC, so you need a proof of identity, proof of address. A lot of some of the offshore ones, if you take Wise, for example, where they're doing through the Bahamas, they're only asking you for a proof of identity. So suddenly it makes it a lot easier for people in the MENA region, let's say, who operate with post boxes or don't have the bills in their name because they're rentals and stuff. Do you see that as a dynamic kind of shift as well?
I think there will be some, because you know, these companies will also have to adapt to the local context. So like if they find that actually they can onboard 60% of the customers because they don't have an address, I think something needs to be done about that. So I think like, I mean, it is like, to me, like, you know, a lot of the EMIs and, you know, have to work very closely with the regulator over here. And obviously, well, I have experience working a little bit with SISIC, you know, and you know, like they are like, it's not necessarily you can kind of, you know, convey your point, I guess, across, you know, straight away, but like they do listen. So I think it's sitting down with the regulator, explaining what the challenges are, explaining what the benefits are, and I think ultimately, you know, it's finding smart ways of doing it. Like in Sweden, for example, a lot of the things can be verified via like a bank ID, which is, you know, like, okay, in this context, maybe it won't work here, but like, you know, everybody has a bank account in Sweden. So you can verify, you can apply for any service with a bank account, essentially. So I feel like applying it to this context, there should be some sort of a, you know, a database or some way to reference, you know, to identify, because KYC, like, it's not really about ID and your address, it's about, like, basically proving that you are who you say you are.
Of course, it's more the AML side. It's protecting it, making sure there's no money laundering or any of these things going on. And I agree with that. It needs to be liberalized somewhat, but the protections need to be there, because at the end of the day, that's what protects most of us from scams, enables us to get our money back, and more importantly, it protects the infrastructure and the integrity of the system, which is what which is the reasons we bank with. One reason why I still use Lloyds is because, you know, they're Lloyds, and you keep the money, you know it's safe, you know it's always going to be there. It might not be flexible in a lot of things, but for a long-term savings or a point like that, it's well worth it.
I've actually just done a speech on that. You know, like a lot of the things, like is subject to counterparty risk, where we're talking about basically self-custody crypto versus traditional banking system, and I basically like said that, look, you know, at the end of the day, whatever transaction you're doing, you're always subject to the counterparty risk. And so in that sense, traditional banks, you know, do offer that additional security because they've been around, you know, for a long time.
Yeah. And something you just mentioned there with the crypto, for example, we see a lot of traditional UK banks don't want to touch anything. They won't even take your withdrawals from your trading, even from a platform. do you see this is why Revolut maybe is moving into the MENA space where, for example, you can come to Dubai and you can buy an apartment on the same day with crypto and everyone's happy. Whereas in Europe, you've got to go through so many jumps and hurdles, proofs of funds. There's always a suspicion of somebody. So do you see maybe that's the reason why the digitalization in MENA is happening, because of that liberalized approach to the crypto and the currency options as well?
I think so. Like, again, like I don't want to speak on behalf of UK regulator, but there is sort of like the fear comes from lack of knowledge, and it's like obviously new, but the SEC, for example, approves crypto ETF. So I do think it's just a matter of time. I think industries and countries that have jumped on this trend earlier, are natural beneficiaries, and I think like we've seen like a lot of you mentioned family offices, there are like high net worth individuals, a lot of people moving to here, and I think obviously like that's in response to the flexibility. So yeah, I do think that digitalization is going to be a massive driver, and I think for companies like Revolut, is going to be another venue to onboard more customers onto it.
Yeah, so we're talking about the digitalization, obviously MENA, and we're talking about Dubai, but we also have North Africa and the other region. So you're seeing countries like Morocco, Tunisia are obviously very much open, quicker even than Dubai was. But they're putting a very large focus on the financial literacy. So I know with Wise and these companies operating there, they have to not just have disclosures, but they have to provide, the clients have to watch help videos, how-to videos, just to make sure that the clients, and I know obviously from a Forex background, we're very, it's a very big push from us to warn our clients of the risk. Are you seeing more banks having to do this as well? And do you see them having to move into the space the more retail-y, let's say, they become?
Well, from a Europe experience, I see that sort of onboarding is becoming, less onerous. It used to be like, with traditional banks, it still is. There's paperwork, there's documents. But with the likes of Revolut or some other kind of new banks, it's essentially a passport, photograph, and a selfie. So I think it depends on the kind of like level of risk what's being offered. I do think that, like if we're talking about leveraged instruments, like there needs to be some sort of education. I don't think it's fair to kind of like sort of, chuck the client through the door and sort of like, look, welcome. And because ultimately, like if people are forced to do something they don't understand, then ultimately, like you're not going to be able to generate sustainable business out of it.
And I mean, we're talking about leverage. I mean, even with someone like Revolut, Wise, these kind of options, and even if you're looking then into other providers who are in the market space, a lot of them are providing unleveraged products as well, which in a lot of cases can be even more risky than the leverage because you're using full equity aspects. So I agree with you on that financial literacy, making it more clear to people. I mean, the one thing that comes around obviously in the banking sector and something that's always discussed, I mentioned Lloyds there, one of the reasons I bank with them is their ISA program, what I get on interest, which then leads into the MENA market with Islamic financing and that. How do you see that aspect developing? Because banks and financial institutions, whether a traditional mortar and brick operation or an EMI, are based around that 200, 300 year model of I take your money, I use that as collateral to loan, I pay you a small interest, but I make the gap. How do you see the banks who are moving into this area taking that traditional approach and adapting it to the Islamic market?
I think the Islamic financing needs to be taken into account. Obviously, like we in the Forex, CFD industry, we have always kind of like had some sort of offering or account, whether it's an account type or a product around that. I think it needs to be taken into account, like interest rates, like how do you go around that? I think like you can't just like sort of expect the same, European, US sort of like percent, annual interest type model, to work here. I think you'll have to look at how to offer it at the same time, make sure that you don't offer the product for free. So I think like the products will need to be adapted. So in which form? I mean, obviously I can speak on behalf of the industry. We know all sorts of waiving the charges or modifying or making them more of like an upfront sort of fee-based approach. I think something around that will have to be done, in the banks and the new banks that are moving into this area as well.
And I think that's it. I think it's obviously utilizing your traditional business model, but with small adaptations.
That's right.
Very much like the trading market and the CFD markets had to do with coming in, which is fantastic. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time, Pavel. It's been great to speak, and we'll be back in around 20 minutes with our next video. Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Good. Fantastic.
Nice. Little waffly.
John, with Scope coming into the MENA region, with us growing, what do you see as, let's say, the top 2 key points for us embracing the local culture and becoming part of the market?
I think number 1 is certainly building trust. That's a lot easier said than done, right? But 2 things I think can really help with that is having a local presence, not necessarily in the UAE, but in Egypt, in some of the other countries that we're kind of focusing on. And of course, showing that you are open to become local by translating what you can, the website, the platform, the educational material, and customer support. I think there are 2 fundamentals for most regions, but specifically for MENA.
And then following up on that, obviously we're talking about like the MENA region, we talked about like Arabic speakers and these kind of demographics within the region, which is obviously the home people. However, we obviously have a huge expat population from the Philippines, from Southeast Asia, even into the expats from Western Europe and America.
Yeah.
How do you see, let's say, ourselves as Scope, as well as catering to the local market, catering to that expat market?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think, just on John's point as well, just to expand a little bit, I think customer experience is everything. And in this context, regional customer experience, we have to regionalize, we have to localize ourselves. That's the key, really. So to your question around that, I think we have to identify what are the demographic groups, are here. We know that, for example, the UAE, if you like, citizens here are 10%. The rest are expats, really. And so I think it's around like what, who are these demographics? Do we have the language support? Is our is our product available in the language of, for what these demographics speak? Do we have the customer service, that can provide service? Do we have account management that can, that can provide support in your local language? Maybe some of these guys as well, they don't just come here and sort of, drop off everything they used to have in their host countries. Perhaps some of the payment methods, that they used to use, we can accommodate that. We see, for example, that a lot of the expats are transacting in the USD, like here in the UAE.
Yeah.
So I think these are important considerations. So it's like double complex in a sense. We have to be local for UAE, well, for the MENA region, but also take into account some of the localized aspects of these expat community from their host countries.
I think obviously we're talking about customer service, languages, and obviously the digitalization of these products I think is really key as well. With 60% of the population being under 30, you have a big expat, we are seeing that digitalization. From a Scope perspective, how have we digitalized the product, and how are we going to continue doing that to give our clients the advantage of not just only access, John, but also access to more and more products as we move along?
So it's, first of all, the majority of customers will trade major indices, right? But I think, major instruments, right? Specifically indices being one of them, oil, commodities. So we have to really ensure that, our service around these products is very strong. And we're not going to move away from that. However, we are going to continue to add like a wide range of instruments, most recently with the local stocks. That gives people the ability to, trade something that they're familiar with, something they see, something they can feel. And I think for the younger demographic specifically, having that available on a mobile platform, mobile first is fundamental at the point in, again, most regions, not just specific to MENA. But to do that and also have things that people can identify with and have access to trade, I think is massively important.
Fantastic. I think it's something we've all discussed. We're a global broker, but we have a local touch.
Yeah, exactly.
Whether it's here, Southeast Asia, Africa, LATAM, it is that approach. And kind of following up on that, we obviously look to not just provide the local product, something as well looking to obviously take local licensing. Maybe that's something you can expand on as well.
Yeah, so we are in the process of local license acquisition. For us, we have 6 licenses in our portfolio, and having the right regulatory regime is very, very important because we want to do things in the right way. Ultimately, we want to do things in a long-term way, not sort of enter the market, do some business and then exit. So yeah, we are looking at local license acquisition and ultimately, expand on that.
So John, one of the things we were discussing is Scope and introducing it to the market. Now, obviously, most of the brokers that you see even at the expo today have grown from the ground up, i.e. retail traders expanded up and become bigger, some of the potentially liquidity providers. Where Scope obviously has been in the marketplace for 10 years, and it's gone the reverse. It's gone from top down. So, the very industrious liquidity option, very, demanded one with a large market share. How do you see that playing into Scope and obviously differentiating us for not only the MENA market, but the greater as well?
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think, one of the key points I would say where it's benefited us the most is being able to come in and, a very short period of time, having a local bank account. We've touched on trust and how important that is, local presence, but a local bank account is obviously fundamental. Now, for a ground-up broker, you're not getting that, right? We were able to attain that local bank account due to our B2B work, due to our relationships, who we trade with and who we deal with on a day-to-day. So that's been, massively beneficial. But of course, that does also segue into what we can offer on the retail side. Like we have a very strong backbone, as you mentioned. We have as you said, even some of the other brokers here in this room, we have as clients and offer liquidity to. Very strong execution, big ticket size, and we can handle that. So I think, naturally that makes us a lot more competitive for this type of client in this region, being more high net worth. They are going on a bit more of a bespoke approach, a bit more of a tailored offering. And because that's kind of our bread and butter anyway, it's a very easy transition for us to offer a similar kind of service to the retail audience directly.
And following on with that point, I think we discussed about the institutional side. Do you see our product offering being true multi-asset broker? I mean, not just a derivative, we're offering multitude. Do you see that as being a key aspect now going forward, especially for the MENA region?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, actually, we were just on the panel talking about multi-asset proposition, and I think we had a number of people from other companies, CEOs, and talking about the same thing. I think it's fundamental. I think obviously CFDs and Forex is a good start. But we're a larger group, if you like. We have companies inside the group, so having being able to provide access to futures market, for example, options to something that we can do today, underlying exchange traded equities, that's something we have in our portfolio as well. I think it's important because people will have different use cases. Not everybody wants to. CFDs are there for easy access, but there are other people may have other demands. So I think it's very, very important, and especially in the context of this market. I mean, it's actually one quick point. We've just launched 2 synthetic indices. The DFM index and then the ADX index, and we're actually the first one to do it. No one offers it in the industry because you can't trade on the the Abu Dhabi Securities Exchange and the Dubai Financial Market. You can't trade the actual indices. So we've kind of launched the products to replicate that. So I think it's just showing another, angle, how you have to tailor your products, to the region.
It's not just about having an offer. It's not just having the options. It's also showing that you're offering that local asset that they want to, which can't be done on a global scale. It's something that we had an article with our team this week that I authored, and it was all around this with cocoa producers in Africa. And these people traditionally haven't had access to the futures market because you have to go with several $1 million.
That's right.
Whereas we can obviously offer them a derivative product, but we can also offer them the same as they want, which is the future aspect, but much lower margins, much lower capital adequacy, and these kind of things. Are we seeing that kind of approach from, let's say, the gold market with more diversifying for that hedging risk with bunkerage brokers? Are we seeing it with that move in the oil sector? Are we seeing that kind of growth and moving to more derivative products, do you think?
So I mean, significant percent of our, let's say, trading flow is in gold, and to an extent, oil. And if you actually break it down, a lot of it is happening in the future. So we have 2 types of CFDs. We have a cash CFD, future CFD, and we're looking to add the both basically the exchange traded futures into for our customers, and also the OTC traded futures for larger transactions. So we are seeing growth in both of these 2 instruments. And I guess especially looking not just at the UAE, but looking at countries in the Middle East as a whole, gold futures and oil futures is a significant percent of the transactional volume.
I think it just, by releasing these instruments, we didn't have to. As I say, we'll be one of the first to offer it. But it just shows our commitment to the region. I think, even if it's not a direct revenue generating instrument or a symbol, for us, it shows that we are here to stay. The work that we've done behind that is a lot of it's behind the scenes. And when you look at it, as Pavel mentioned, the vast majority in most regions is going to be, gold, oil, US indices and majors, right? But in reality, for us to still show that we have done that work anyway, we're here to stay. And I think it kind of compounds the other efforts and the energy that we're putting towards building that trust with scope in the region.
So we obviously discussed just before about the payment options and why we were here. So obviously we have the bank account options. We're obviously onboarding digital, so you can see whether it's Saudi Arabia with SAD, or Farwe in Egypt, all these digital payments. Are we in Dubai in the MENA region as a whole starting to see individual companies grow, or myself and Pavel were talking about the growth and the impact that Revolut is starting to have in the market? Do we see that as more of an option, or do you start to see more of these companies starting to pop up with smaller organic organizations do digital payments going forward?
Yeah, I mean, so you mean PSPs
Well,
directly?
PSPs, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Like it's ever changing, right? So like for us, we're fortunate to have a very strong management team, very strong networks, and I think we just want to utilise that as much as we possibly can. We have to stay at the on the front foot. Have to be aware of the changes, regulatory wise or client demand. And for that, like we're kind of generally one of the first to know about any move. As long as we've got very good people, because the strategy is in play in terms of having very strong expertise on the ground, we can get that feedback very quickly. We can understand what that, say, problem is or what's needed to be delivered, feed that back, be client first, continue to be client-centric, and deliver it quite quickly. So if there is an emerging payment provider, as an example, then I would like to think we're, at the front of delivering that to our customers. Yeah.
Obviously, we're discussing about licenses and acquisitions. For Scope, obviously, what's the reason for taking a license, and obviously, what's our expansion plans going forward over the next 12 to 18 months? Where do you see us being?
I think you can't really talk about expansion in the region without some sort of a local license. I mean, you have to comply with the local rules and regulations. So I think our immediate goal is to ensure we have that, so we can offer products and products to the local market. We can employ people here locally. We can expand, especially when we talk about some of the business development teams. So I think that's kind of the goal. Obviously, Dubai has become, or Middle East or UAE as a whole has become a bit of a hub. The industry has been sort of moving east, for a number of years. So I think it's important to have the presence. There's an amazing talent here in the market, and so obviously from here it acts as a launch pad for us to then go into other markets, both in the Middle East and then further afield.
Yeah, definitely.
John, final point. Something we discussed just before was about we're an institutional, big institutional. You mentioned about several brokers, if
exactly.
no more than we already have here. Do you see us as being somebody who's cutting out the middleman and offering that institutional to retail traders? What do you see the proposition of Scope, or what is that vision for going into the retail avenue?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on it earlier as well. I think for us to be able to be tailored, to be able to be bespoke is going to make us stand out. And eventually, as I say, we want to be client-facing ourselves. We see a good amount of volume and traction from other brokers, in the region. So of course, it's natural that with our licenses, with our expertise, and our people on the ground, we want a piece of that. That doesn't necessarily mean that because you don't have to offer the same execution, or you don't have to offer the same trading conditions to B2B. We will, and I think that's going to be the key difference.
And something that obviously we do globally. Is that something that we're going to be looking to do in the future, more as a based product? And offering those kind of things, or are we going to be focusing more around the trading aspects?
Yeah, I think education is important. Like we again mentioned earlier about the moderation into place. Having that localized is key, and I think for us, we kind of want to leverage the expertise that we have via some of our RV relationships as an example. Very strong services, very core, good, strong businesses themselves. And I think for us, we're kind of working on, yes, growing, but also improving, the knowledge of our underlying clients too. And we can, of course, take advantage. Exactly.
And that's as we say, it's not just about that quick onboarding, the quick deposit, the quick withdrawal. It's that homogeneous attitude of looking after the client from the beginning to the end. I think something that most brokers discuss and everything is all about client life cycle and span. You want a client to come to you, enjoy the first experience, enjoy while they trade with you, and even if they decide to stop trading with you, you want them going away with that kind of good opinion. And I think obviously that's something we focus on with Scope. Thank you very much for the time, guys. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
And we'll be back in 20 minutes with our next vlog.
Cool.
Very good, guys.
Good.
like you to more into take that and actually put it into action.
Yeah, I mean, as we mentioned previously, now we're of work, a lot of it with our underlying customers. For us to grow, we need to leverage the partnerships that have that, expertise, that local knowledge as well. So we have to be careful and find that balance between, of course, wanting the business to grow, but also ensuring that the partners that we have also meet the same values that we have around compliance, around transparency, things that are fundamental and core to the business. So we do a lot of due diligence. It's not always, what the partner might like in terms of documentation that we might ask for or the process, but it is very important, because it's not just a case of, onboarding IB the same day, you're receiving clients tomorrow without actually really understanding what the IB does, what their services are, does it align with the brand? So, I think it's very important not to miss that step, and something that I've observed that maybe is missing at some of the competition, sorry to say.
But I think it is. Listen, personal perspective, I'm a salesman.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, but we're very anxious to get quick business, quick everything. And I think that's something that's important to understand. It's not just about the money, the dollar today, the dollar next month and 6 months. And I think that's something that you said, the transparency, the regulatory framework. These are the kind of things that it's a true partnership. Clients might not like being asked for X, Y, and Z, but it's not just for their own safety, it's for the client's sake, it's for the company's safety as well. So their funds are protected to get the best trading environments and stuff like that.
The traditional IB, landscape's changed dramatically. You've now got influencers, educator providers, online portals, signal providers, range. So to try and, first of all, you can't have a one-size-fits-all, but you still have to have a good understanding of ultimately what that company or what the individual is offering, how they're, representing scope, right? So I think for us, it is vitally important and something that, of course, from a commercial perspective, we want things done yesterday, right? In reality, that's not always the case. And actually, as you said, we're here for, a long period of time. We've got a foundation to commit to this region, that's going to be paramount for our success. So for us, doing things right kind of does, win, if you like, in terms of us, as opposed to just through the door tomorrow.
Well, something you mentioned there was something I'm quite familiar with. I work with them on a daily basis, deal with problems on a daily basis. My aspect, and I think it's, as you said there, I think it goes to the old adage, it takes years to build a reputation and minutes to destroy it.
Exactly.
So, from our aspect, let's take it as a very granular point, from a compliance to a sales aspect, how do we manage these kind of operations? Is it we dictate to the partners? Are we working with them? Are we just setting guidelines from? How do you think we as a company work and help these people?
Look, I mean, we're a growing company or a growing team, so, especially, individuals that have that existing relationship, we kind of rely on. With IB to say company, it is very much a relationship, driven collaboration, right? Like 100%. So for us, it's a case of really backing our people and therefore by default backing that partner. It's kind of layered approach. We do the normal due diligence. We don't want to roadblocks and ask too many questions that are unnecessary, obviously. But, for us, it is a case where, we do like to understand as much as we possibly can what the background is, not just how many clients are they bringing in, what are they offering, what is the service that's there, what's the product, how are they going to be selling scope, how are they going to be, representing scope. So, it's a case of, working with the contact, the BDM, the premium account manager, whoever it is who's brought that IB in, and then working with them, because not only is it a case of kind of being defensive, but actually it helps us gauge, okay, how can we get our arms around that individual or that company and improve their business? Because in turn, we're going to be our partners to grow our company.
And again, as you said, it's our partnership. It's you're providing with X, Y, and Z from a liquidity and a platform standpoint. They're providing you the client mix. And I mean, something else I think we discussed that we've not touched on there. We're discussing for influencers, how they represent the company. But I think something for me, one of the reasons I personally joined Scope from another very large broker was the fact of the rise of the influencers and what they're trading. The volume they trade with copy trading, MAMs and PAMs and all their individuals. clients don't have that book, or brokers don't have the book to a lot of time be able to give them the execution they want. So in some ways, you're being detrimental to that partner, to the client. How do you see scope with being mainly an institutional broker growing downwards into the space? How do you see that helping these influencers as a partnership?
Client retention. That's the short answer. Like, yes, some IBs, influencers are high churn, like getting a huge amount of new accounts through the door. But then, like a broker does, you face that challenge of attrition every single month, and actually you're just replacing the clients you lose. Now, because of that backbone being B2B, as you touched on, that's why our client retention will be so high. And if you think of like partners, I want to move away from the word of IBs because that is very transactional, but they are partners, as you pointed out correctly. For them to grow, they don't want to just simply replace the clients they lose on a monthly basis, especially down to execution. I think execution is one of the most disappointing things you can lose customers on, because for us as well, like there's no added benefit, or any of the brokers that do, of course, execute trades via whatever platform they're using. There's no win, as I said, right? And I think that's something that we do really notice. And when we're speaking to IBs, and of course we're evolving, right? We're putting a lot of emphasis, as you know, in terms of uptake, improving the onboarding, and improving the IB portal. But the underlying foundation is enabling the customers to trade on the price that they see, right? That's if you really drill it down.
I think it's not having fancy marketing spreads, getting a realistic approach. That's something we discussed before, even from the compliance standpoint. Maybe partners and even clients don't appreciate it sometimes. But the reality is, if you trade 0.1 with us, you get the price you get.
Exactly.
You trade 0.1 with the majority of retail brokers there, you're probably going to get slipped by 10, 15 cents because it's a marketing.
Yeah.
So we touched on the execution, which obviously is huge. But obviously, especially in the MENA region, whether it's Saudi, Dubai, Kuwait, Oman, even then into Morocco and Egypt and things like this, clients expect a different, much more gloved approach. How is scope and how are we changing that approach to give them that great first impression from the beginning? What are the things that we're doing?
So look, it's a good point. And as I say, we are ultimately a global, right? We're not sort of, I don't think at this point in time, you can look at scope and say, it's that one region that they've already now. We've committed to MENA. We've got boots on the ground here, hiring. We're going to be really focused on individuals to have that, that relationship with the IBs, with the partners, and grow their business, because it grows trust and it does enable that like bespoke offering that we kind of talked for as well. A real personalized service, someone that's not just, even if you look at, you mentioned Egypt, for example, it wouldn't just be, for example, hiring an Arabic speaker in Dubai to deal with Egypt. For me, if I was to be looking at Egypt, I would want boots on in Egypt with Egyptians. That's the way that we approach it, right? We kind of really define our markets, understand what we need on a product side to go and win there, give them what they need within reason, obviously, and then for them to go and work with their partners. And I think that kind of sums it up. And Egypt's a pretty good example, actually.
I think so. Egypt's a very excited and going through Southeast Asia. The viewers only have to look at our LinkedIn posts to see how much we travel. We're putting the boots on the ground. We very much believe, as a group, that the decision makers should be also the ones meeting the clients and facing the clients. From standpoint in terms of the tech, we touched on the onboarding. I know we've brought on some new technology there that's obviously making it much more seamless. How do you see that going, and do you see that linking into legacy technology such as MetaQuotes, or do you see new variations coming from that as well?
The demand is still there, MetaQuotes, without a doubt, without a shadow of a doubt, right? And I think of course it's good to have your own tech, and you want to eventually build towards like being a bit more diversified and not just kind of offering that. But what kind of separates Meta brokers is that service, and that's especially with the expertise that we have within the organisation. That's something that we can leverage a lot more, than we currently do. Rebrand being a key part of that, really separating, let's say, the old from the new in terms of scope, aligning scope with Rostro, Scope Prime, how it all fits together. And then, of course, you'll see that, as you mentioned, in terms of the presence that we're going to have. But yeah, there's no real, from our side, sort of, trick or anything we're doing on that side whatsoever. Really, I say, it's just committing to the right region, building up products around that people, and then just enabling them to business, which in turn works for us.
So something we touched on in one of our previous conversations, was that we actually see ourselves as a true multi-asset broker.
Yeah.
There's multiple who say, oh, we offer shares, but it's a CFD. So something we discussed was about the Abu Dhabi exchange and things like this. Obviously, this is good showing our roots in the country.
Yeah.
But do you find there's an awful lot of family offices who are also looking for that access to, let's say, US equities markets, the European markets?
Yeah.
And do you see that as a key leverage point for us growing and expanding into the market?
Yeah, definitely. That's the backbone of the business, right? Ultimately, and you mentioned, you described it quite well earlier. That's top-down approach. A lot of retail brokers are trying to push into B2B. That's the fundamental of the company, and to get to where we are now. So we're using that to kind of transition or pivot, at least focus, without sort of cannibalizing any of the B2B base, but enabling it to push further into retail. So yeah, family offices, asset managers, fund managers, other brokers, that's the key client base right now. However, of course, that doesn't mean that it's exclusive to those customers. There's a huge amount, especially in this region, of high net worths or clients that would qualify to trade these more traditional pieces too. And of course, we'll still continue to enable them. It's not going to be your run-of-the-mill. You're not going to get, when you're looking at, thousands of FTDs, you're not going to get thousands of these customers that are going to be on board and trade of single stock equities, like using Iris as an example.
Yeah.
But we can service them, so why not? And I think that's the way we look at it.
And obviously, the dynamism of the products, you're seeing that dynamism into the platforms as well with the new demands.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Iris there.
Yeah.
One thing we, the company, have done, obviously, is we work with Prime XM, we work with 1.0. We've also onboarded Centroid quite recently, which obviously has a very large amount of presence. Are you seeing this as that next logical step in terms of not just the provisions of servicing and technology, but also for the infrastructure build as well, to make sure it's like, okay, well, we have an office, but we're also offering our tech from here as well.
Exactly.
Showing those kind of stuff.
That's a great point. And that's an unsung hero, if you like, right? Your middleware. It's not the client-facing piece. It's not that. I mean, it's very important though. And the same as you using local PSPs. There's tons here that are really specialists in the GCC region and within MENA. So that's of course something we can take advantage of being here. Local bank account we touched on, absolutely. Clients and IBs and partners are going to benefit from all of that.
Yeah.
Now, if it benefits the client, it benefits the IB, because it's going to make the IB more successful in winning and partnering with Scope, which of course in turn makes complete sense for us too.
I think that's the key thing. I think it's not just about, again, one side benefiting or the other side benefiting. It has to be a mutually point thing. And I think that comes from a technology to a liquidity standpoint to what you're doing, whether it's their marketing activities and helping them grow. I think all these things are kind of key. One thing we haven't really touched on, though, is the localized support from offices.
Yeah.
So not necessarily business support, but let's say the marketing support or the customer support, services support. So one thing we discussed earlier is about our ESCA license, our new officing, our plan to hire quite heavily going into 2025. And around that, we're going to be looking at, obviously, not just sales support, but we're going to be looking at maybe marketing support and the back end support, let's say.
Exactly.
Maybe you could expand on that and the vision of Scope there and why we
for sure. That. Obviously Arabic, one language, fortunately, unlike Southeast Asia, as you mentioned, covers a
large proportion
of the audience. Exactly. So for us, that's no excuse that's not an excuse for us to be seamless in every area of the business, right? Anything that the Arabic, customer base would expect, website, onboarding, portal, IB portal, CS, covering their hours, and local stocks, it all has to be there. That's a complete given. Right? And as you know,
101s.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's a case of, there's no point even having a discussion outside of that. And, fundamentally, bang, that's straight in, straight away. So, sorry, what was that? Yeah.
So, basically, there's something that I think you and myself obviously spend a lot of time together as well, and stuff like that. Something we discuss all the time is something that comes up as a very common phrase is successful partnerships go beyond the finance side of the business. And I think that's something we've touched on here. Is it's not just about the fact if you bring me money, I give you a platform, I make my money, you get paid, everyone's happy.
That's it.
It has to be that. Where are we going? Where are we growing? And obviously, I think this attitude, with the growing entrepreneurship in the MENA region, with the huge population of 60% being under the age of 30,
Yeah.
I think that's where our key demographic of growth is going to be. Attending events like this, with how busy our booth is, showing our presence, and as we said before, with the decision makers being present and showing our faces of who we are as individuals and people, I think puts a face to a brand and allows people to connect on a more personal,
Absolutely.
basis.
No, that's and as you know, you were talking about marketing earlier, right? And I think that's what, of course, like 100%. You know, like for us, our partners at the stage where we are, you know, and being in reality a new entrant to a lot of these markets, not to MENA. You know, we've got, you know, a huge amount of, you know, B2B business here, to the retail space without a doubt. And for us, we have to accept that working with a partner is an investment.
Of course.
So, of course, we do our due diligence on that part, and we spoke about the compliance, importance, transparency. But at the same time, you know, that partner or that IB that's leaving an existing broker or is emerging or is kind of putting their neck out to also sort of represent Scope has to be recognised too. So it's an investment for us to get behind them, and in a two-way, of course, they should expect that, say, transactional relationship, you know. And, you know, for us, we'll always pride ourselves on making sure we're paying IBs, you know, daily rebates. You know, you're going to have full transparency. There's no one that's going to have any issues around that side. You know, we'll pride ourselves on that completely. But yeah, definitely, I think it is an investment. You know, it's a new market, it's new specific countries in the MENA region. We're not known. We know that we're going to have to commit that. So yes, there was expectations behind our partners, but at the same time, we have to kind of accept completely that it's an investment to that for us to be really taken seriously in a specific market.
And obviously, as a last point, see, Dubai is our hope, really, and we've been here a long time. We've done a lot of business. We all have a lot of contacts. Over the next, let's say, 12 to 18 months, where do you see the other key target points in the region being? I mean, everyone talks Saudi, Kuwait, Oman. Are we looking a mass market approach with going to all these regions, or are we going to look for more, as we discussed before, that personalized approach to each market, so it's more of a gradual growth?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and I think Northern Africa is definitely important. You know, I think that's a very strong market.
Underserved in some ways.
Exactly, I'm completely right. And for us as well, like we have to look at and accept where we are as a company from a product perspective, you know, from a value proposition perspective, and where we can go and win. So what's our shortest route to start seeing results? And I think Northern Africa, you'll see, you know, is going to be very important. And you know, I'm very excited about the plans we've got for that.
So I'm pretty sure people, thank you for telling me that. I'm sure the people will be delighted to know that my LinkedIn photos will soon be in North Africa,
exactly.
as well as Southeast Asia.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you very much for your time, John. Pleasure as always. Thank you very much, guys, and we'll be back in around 20 minutes with our next video. So we're going to be talking about IPOs in the UAE. Are these oversubscribed products or undercapitalized? So something that I noticed as personally as a trader, I've been in the market several years, that, you know, in Europe, for example, there's a dearth of IPOs coming out now. You're seeing a few in the US, for example, still as the main market in the NASDAQ and that. But in the UAE, it seems to be gobbled up very quickly. We've had 35 billion dirham, so $10 billion in IPOs in a very immature, new market. Where do you see and why do you see this market growing so fast?
I think there's a massive amount of untapped capital, uninvested cash just sitting on the sidelines. People are looking for quality homes for this. So the listing requirements in Dubai and in Abu Dhabi, whilst there are base level achievements that need to be met, they are very keen that a lot of the locally privately held companies are listed, come to market. And what we're seeing is digital equities. So when these listings take place, bang, the money's coming in with aplomb. I mean, Spinneys, the supermarket group, was one just earlier this year that stood out.
100%. I think we saw great P&E from them. I think we had, was it a 64 ratio, 64% oversubscription in the assets. And I think it's not only just that. I think you're also seeing the family offices moving into the seeding funds. You've seen with Bolero, some of the family offices, the sovereign wealth funds going into Revolut, going into new products. So do we see that more as the traditional Europeans, Western companies are now coming to MENA to list an IPO?
Well, I think there's a limitation on that to an extent because of those minimum requirements that you need in terms of the trading history locally. But with a longer term time horizon on it, why not? If you think, well, I want to list in 5 years' time, then should I be thinking about setting up an entity in the UAE?
So maybe Aramco jumped too soon. Maybe they should have waited. I think something, again, you mentioned there with the cash. One thing I've heard here is like, whereas everyone goes after Berkshire and Warren Buffett because they have the biggest cash reserves, you're looking at. So is that why you're seeing it? I know on a regulatory perspective, people have to open offices here, have the presence. Maybe you can expand on that for our viewers a little further and explain to them the intricacies around actually listing.
Yeah, well, those requirements, I'm not fully au fait with them, but I do know that you have to have that, that trading history. You need to have a local presence, so you can't just do it remotely from Europe. But I think what we see laid out in the price action, in this massive oversubscription we see for the shares when they come to market, and then beyond that, the fact that the prices don't go crazy once they list. The listing price seems to stick there or thereabouts. So
I mean, that again, it's a very interesting factor. If we take something let's say, we'll avoid Europe now because it's not necessarily a good example with the amount that come out. But let's say if we look at the US market, we look at the last 10 years of big listings. So we look at Snap, for example. Snap is the initial IPO 6 months before listing. It's trading around $26, $27. I was a very lucky individual who managed to get in at an early level. I think on day of launch, we were up to $54, $55, $56. It peaked up 24 to 48 hours after launch to around 80. And then we had a massive crash down to 30. And that's something you're saying that not seeing this enough.
Not seeing it. You may see a slight overreaction and then a mean reversion. But the reality seems to be that these listings happen. The wannabe investors are happy with the valuation. If they get scaled back or don't get their order filled, they're not rushing in to chase to buy it at any price.
So are you seeing this maybe it's because more of a P&E ratio? Are you seeing it because people are long-term investors and more maybe in the West, they become speculators within the market?
I think that's right. There are some signs of stagging taking place, especially on some of the spin-out IPOs that we're seeing. But I think it's that long-term investment. People are happy to buy in to the quality stocks at the levels the banks are saying. And if they're not getting in at that point, they're not going to chase it at all costs. Because as you say, that starts to have a derogatory effect on the P ratio, on the dividend yield, on all this kind of stuff. If you're just chasing a share price higher, people are quite happy to leave that cash sitting on the sidelines. When the money comes, when the next opportunity comes along, they're going to be in there for it.
So let's say, like, we're obviously talking about Western companies potentially coming here, they're changing the demographics. Let's take someone like Standard Chartered, a worldwide bank, very large presence in the UK, very large retirement holdings, and their traditional market is going within the FTSE European markets. Do you think this is where we're going to see that next move away from the private investors to the actual banks coming here and the retirement funds and putting their money into the market?
Well, looking at a market level, one thing that's very interesting is the the lack of correlation between the Abu Dhabi and Dubai markets and others, see it to a degree, but not as it's not as amplified. So in terms of being a long-term store of wealth, I think there's a lot of potential there, and there are some good dividend-yielding stocks in there as well. So I think in terms of the long-term outlook, why not? Well, it should be on the radar.
I think something you see, especially in the UAE exchange, Saudi exchange, and even within the Abu Dhabi exchange, there's a lot of industrial companies, and you're starting to see that homogenesis, very much like Europe had for years. America, we're seeing the trade battles. You're seeing MENA not only buying from people now, but producing within its own region, potentially becoming a net exporter. So these companies obviously aren't only just going to grow, they need to expand. So potentially the next aspect for them is doing IPOs, getting the cash capital to expand their operations. Kind of around that aspect, you would say, Lee.
Absolutely, yeah.
Brilliant. Now, something we touched on is a few banks. Now, there's obviously a lot of sovereign wealth. There's a lot of private families and family networks who have traditional ties here, whether they've been here 20, 30 years. Let's take Tesla for a prime example. Shareholdings in SpaceX, Twitter, or now X, etc. Obviously, a lot of the main shareholders and backers in these kind of points are men. Do you think we're going to start seeing the point where we start having reverse dual listings? So if we take Shell for an example, where they were on the Dutch exchange and the British because they needed, do you think we're going to start seeing them staying on the US exchange and dual listing into the MENA exchange?
I don't know. I think that might be a stretch too far because it's so easy now to see the flow of capital cross border. If you think about when Shell had that dual listing, how difficult it was then, even to buy anything other for a UK investor to buy anything other than a UK stock, was whether even if you're institutional, it was painful.
And
so
depending on the company you go in, do you have preferential A or preferential B shares, and where's the point? So around these kind of points, we obviously have the growing companies, we have the market growing. So we said before, there's no subscription. So they managed to, the Dubai Exchange managed to raise roughly 35 billion in the last 3 years, but the oversubscription was up to 1 trillion.
Yeah, that's it. It's 30-fold oversubscribed on average.
So what is happening to that capital? Are they just sitting in cash? Are they investing in businesses? Where do you see the kind of potential for that market, and where do you see the potential growth for the IPOs coming?
I mean, I think what that suggests to me is there's an absolute hunger for equities as an asset class. People have not got enough exposure to listed equities. They want to have that flexibility. They want to have that visibility, that price transparency, the improved levels of governance that come with a listed company. So I think that that sits on the sidelines. It's going to take an awful long time for that to be consumed, but it's going to be a great success story as it goes.
Obviously, talking about the exchanges, you mentioned governance, as well as which links us to the regulation. One thing you've actually seen is these exchanges in and taking some of the best minds and people from the FTSE, from NASDAQ, from DAX, and bringing them in to create their own product. Isn't just a carbon copy, but is a unique product for that MENA region, but also giving the rigidity of NASDAQ, of the Dow, as you said, the solidity and that confidence that people have that they know what's happening. In terms of the mechanisms, we're not seeing huge amounts of listings at the moment. You're not seeing huge amounts of volume, which links into what you mentioned before, that people are looking at as a long-term investment. Maybe potentially, I mean, obviously we've just seen, and we mentioned before about the sovereign wealth funds putting their money into Revolut. As an attraction, and say as yourself, put yourself in Revolut's shoes. You're opening an office here, you're getting big investments. Does that IPO option into a Dubai exchange suddenly become more attractive than the launch into a Western exchange when they're thinking on the tech basis of people like Snap, where you've had that jump and sell off because people are looking for the quick buck? Do you think maybe now, as a bank in essence, a fintech, real bank, who their value is what's going to give them that growth, do you think maybe that IPO in the MENA region is now more attractive to them for that region?
There's certainly grounds for that. At the end of the day, a Revolut as a bank versus Revolut as a fintech, two very different propositions, I think, for what they require from a listing, because you don't want a bank with a share price that's bouncing around from $25 one day to $75 the next, and then back at 40 by the end of the week.
So again, you might have a product that they start to compartmentalize, subsidiarize the business down, and only list certain aspects, and then keep the whole group, holding group that then keeps shares. That's the kind of
That could well be an option that they consider. But it's the market is evolving so quickly now in terms of the ability to do that, the ability to work across borders, and something I know you've touched on in the past, tokenization as well. There's when Revolut, or even if Revolut eventually lists, what will the world look like then? And
be the form, and I think that's something I touched on in one of my previous conversations, tokenization. We've had it at previous expos as well. I think it's quite important to understand that where the attraction with MENA comes in from, with big banks, whether it's Nomura and having them, a lot of their main tokenization crypto business here, these ones, the attraction is they're open to doing business. Something I discussed with our CEO before was you can come to Dubai and you can buy a house for crypto, and no one asks you for the proof of funds.
yeah,
It's a very much a straight up transaction. The tax man's happy and everyone. Whereas I can't even send money from a platform I trade with to my Lloyd's bank because they reject it straight away. So are you seeing this as more of an attraction as well, where the movement of funds, it makes it easier for people to buy and sell? Because some of these ultra wealthy people aren't just holding their money in gold or cash anymore. They are holding large percentages of crypto. I mean, the last estimate I saw is 25 of the top 60 crypto wallets, all based out of the MENA region.
right.
So you're seeing that aspect now with people having it. So maybe the next move into for the IPO space is tokenization for buying and selling, opposed to the traditional fiat currencies or local currencies. What's your opinion on that?
Obviously, you've got a headache here because people in the wider market require a dollar or other fiat currency equivalent valuation for that asset, especially if you're borrowing against that asset. And you don't want, it's bad enough if the business's fortunes are impacting the valuation, never mind something that can be quite erratic, such as the value of a crypto.
Yeah, so maybe something like a stable coin would be a lot more pragmatic, where it has like a 0.01 variance and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And for MENA as a whole, do you start to see a lot more centralization of the exchanges? Because obviously over the last couple of years, pre-COVID and a little bit afterwards, Saudi and obviously the Crown Prince made the moves to say, right, if you want to deal with Saudi, you have to have your base in Saudi, not in Dubai. But that seems to be liberalizing a little bit now. Do you see it where potentially the cross-strait business starts to come, where everyone has an exchange, but now there's going to be a one centralized MENA exchange? Or do you still see the decentralization of these?
I think the biggest issue with that is the fact that whilst Dubai and Abu Dhabi trade now on a Western Monday to Friday, many other GCC countries trade Sunday to Thursday. So that throws open a whole raft of questions. And I think just that basic logistical point does leave that difficult.
Obviously, even with Saudi, where it pushes another hour forward, it makes it even a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
Where it's open or closed.
And I think there is such a weight of capital that the region can sustain in multiple markets. I don't think I don't think consolidation of traditional markets is the necessary solution here.
What you really like, especially in IPOs. Seen very much a slowdown in the last 6 to 7 years of IPOs and Forex companies that are growing out. You had back in the day with the plus 500s, then you had, FX Pro who cancelled their IPO. You haven't really heard much since. You have CapEx and a few, now off with Naga Markets and these kind of organizations. But with MENA being more open to the market, with them enjoying Forex, appreciating it and expanding it, do you potentially see the next IPO of Forex company maybe being in the MENA region opposed to one of the traditional markets?
Well, I guess the challenge with that is it goes back to that listing requirement. Can the company claim to have its headquarters here when it is more than typically not going to be regulated primarily in the region? So, I mean, obviously there are some names that that are at the show today that could tick that box. And obviously there's going to be a degree of pressure because, as I understand it, at the very highest levels in government and society, they're saying, look, if you have a big company, and they're not talking massive, they're not talking billions of dollars here, they're talking millions of dollars. If you've got a company with a trading record in the region and it's privately held, you should be listing that on exchange.
think that also, as you said, it makes it more attractive to the locals. They're looking to buy, they're interested to buy, they want to trade, and they want it for the long term.
Long term.
Which I think for investors, especially forex companies, especially for banks, especially for these ones where your income can change from a month to month basis. As you said, you don't want the share price jumping and dropping because 10% of your base is selling and 10% is buying. You need that consistency.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Tony. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Fraser.
Guys, we'll be back in around 20 minutes. And thank you for joining us for discussing IPOs in the UAE.
Well done.
Oh, my leg's gone dead. It's my fucking honest since I had my
Check, 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 check. 1, 2, 3, sir. 1, 2, 3, thank you. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.